Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And apart from this gorgeous ray of light breaking in, today I wanted to talk about a book that has been sort of very well hyped, and I think actually for good reason, which is Britney Spears's new book, her memoirs, The Woman in Me. And I think although it's not obviously the sort of typical thing I review on my channel, I found it really interesting and sort of wanted to note a couple of points because I think it sort of brings up wider points really about kind of the way stories are told and who often gets to tell them. It's worth noting right from the beginning here that Britney did use a ghostwriter for it, but I think the larger point around that seems to have been more to tell the story in a very sort of realistic and logically organized way for somebody whose memories of the time are quite painful for her to really delve into. And so as a result, actually her being able to talk more directly to somebody who then basically transcribes it and turns it into more of a narrative seems to make sense. That feels like a very good use for a ghostwriter, to really kind of allow somebody to tell a very painful story whilst not having to labour over the words in a way that might be incredibly traumatic for them. So anyway, but it came out with a big sort of splash, and obviously Britney is somebody who has been very publicly known for a very long time. Her whole life has really been under the gaze of the media. And I think what I found incredibly interesting about her book was the various ways that it really reshapes partly how we tell celebrity memoirs. I'm not sort of suggesting that it's this sort of a new style or a new method of doing it, but just that it's a really interesting sort of tell-all that also holds back, and I think in a way that is incredibly poignant. So let's start overall. I will go into some spoilers about parts of the book. I'll try to avoid those as much as I can because I think the wider topic is the more important part, and I'll go on to spoilers a little bit later. But essentially, to start off with, obviously this book engages a lot with the conservatorship that she was under. And this conservatorship, which I can never say, was really placed on her under these really quite horrible circumstances. And this is what she talks about a lot in the later part of this book. But we learn essentially quite early on about the impact that fame and this conservatorship had over her life. The fact that so much of her life has been very much almost point and click. It's been, okay, Britney, wake up at this time, you go and do this thing, then it's gym, then you go over here, then you've got this show and you're going to go on this other talk show, and then you're going to go and do a fan signing, and you're going to do all these other things in a way that is quite frankly baffling to me. I can't wrap my head around what that must look like day in, day out for somebody. And I think also we learn quite early on about how many things were kept out of the public eye for very poignant reasons, sometimes to save the skin of somebody else and to not drag somebody down, but a lot of the time because actually women in the media are penalised often for some of the for some of the same things that men do, but in a far worse way. You know, she obviously references her relationship with Justin Timberlake, and a big part of what comes up in that is the way that she knows that when something comes up and it's revealed that she's not a virgin, she, as this sort of teen pop star, you know, girl next door kind of character, is going to get penalized a lot more for that in the media than someone like Justin, who is a man, and is kind of, it almost adds to his reputation, whereas it takes away from hers. Good old school sexism going on right there. And it's sort of bizarre to see that through her eyes and actually realize the various ways that many of us would have been complicit in that at the time, right? That we would have watched the media kind of updates about her. I was, you know, of an age where Britney was sort of coming out when I was like a teen, or probably just before teenager years. And so her music would have been everywhere. But she would have been this figure where, you know, we wouldn't have really stepped back and critically thought about how she was being portrayed. We would have just sort of swallowed those things wholesale. And I think sort of following that, some of the other ways that she as a woman in the media would have had her story told for her were also incredibly damning and came up in really brutal ways throughout the book. She talks, for example, about how every time she would do something, people would immediately call her a bad mother, or they would call her out on various things immediately, in a way where her male counterparts probably would have been given, there'd have been a sly joke about it, and then it would have, people would have moved on. And it's interesting because I also sort of read this memoir around the same time that I was listening to the audiobook of Paris Hilton's memoir. And Paris Hilton also talks about some of these same things, that particularly that kind of 90s, early 2000s media landscape was very much one where women would just be paraded out there in a way that we expected perfection from them. We expected them to be, the good time girl and be perfect in so many ways. And we wouldn't accept any mistakes from them, and we wouldn't let them ever err or be human. And when they did cross those lines, they would be absolutely slaughtered in the media. And this, I suppose, comes on to some of the later part of the book, and this does get into some more of the spoiler side. So please do feel free to log off if you're planning on reading the book soon. What I will say is, I think some of the revelations that come out in this book are handled in an incredibly even-handed way, in the sense that Britney is not out for revenge, which is probably just as well for the people who are named in it. She is out for peace. And that's very much the sense that I got throughout the book, that this is not her wanting to destroy the lives of these people. This is her attempting to rebuild her life and understand what has happened to her and process what's happened to her. And so this book reads like her thinking of herself as this woman in going into the future. And she even talks about this more specifically, that, at various times the conservatorship and various other things in her life require her to not only be a strong woman who's able to endure some of these things, they also sometimes require her to have a girlish innocence of ignoring what's going on, and that being the public image, or they want her to be a sex siren, or they want her to be whatever else. And she must perform these different roles for whatever is needed. And I think all of those things are incredibly shocking in their own ways. But I think there's something tender about the way this book is written, that it is more about, I survived, and here is me telling my side of the story that I've not been allowed to tell for so long, which I think is what made it so profoundly moving, particularly as Britney is somebody who many of us would have grown up with. She was still is so famous that, it's odd that we almost don't know some of these things given how big she has been. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to go into some spoilers here, but if you need to log off, please do so. But I think it's an incredibly interesting portrait into her life. And it's interesting, I guess, to see what will come from that next. So if you need to log off, please do so here. I'm going to very quickly go into some spoilers here. So some of the spoilers, and I think there are 2 or 3 main events that really surprised me. And these have been ones that have been reported on quite a lot, but I think it's worth saying, the first being she and Justin Timberlake had there was a pregnancy essentially, and neither of them really knew what to do in this situation. Britney claims that Justin didn't want to be a father and was sort of freaked out by this idea, and Britney was very aware that she would not be able to do this publicly without going to a hospital. So she bought a home termination kit and did it there. And it's a really stark passage in this book to hear somebody talk about probably one of the most vulnerable and horrific things for her that she felt she had to do in that moment. The termination itself is not the horrific thing, just that she felt that she had to do that alone, and that she felt that she had to do that without any support. And that is incredibly rough, that, here are these two people in their early 20s just in this world and they have been public for years and known about for years, and their whole lives kind of watched. And this sort of agonizing thing for Britney has to happen behind these closed doors for fear of paparazzi. And that's shocking in and of itself. I think another big part when she's talking about the conservatorship is her talking about how it's believed that, all of these rules are placed on her, and it happens in this quite dark way where she's essentially almost kidnapped. It's very much people come straight in, place these rules down on her, and immediately take her into doing this, and then whip her off to a Diane Sawyer interview later. And all of this is happening, and she talks about the fact that people have often questioned why she didn't stop it, or why she didn't try and walk away. And she realizes basically that the only way for her to survive it is to kind of keep thinking about her kids, because ultimately if she doesn't follow these rules, her fear is that her children will be taken away from her. She's already been publicly accused of being a bad mother, and the idea is that it would be very easy to convince a court of law that she is a terrible mother and therefore the children should be taken away from her. So as soon as she doesn't follow the rules of the conservatorship, the kids will be taken away. And she talks about the kind of fortitude it took to hold on to that image for years and years. The idea that to sit there and process it required her to kind of just only focus on two main goals, really, which was getting through to the next day and kind of thinking about her kids. And it's a really horrifying story in so many ways, particularly because you just sense this, all the ways in which she has cut off her feelings. She's completely almost alienated herself from herself in order to survive this. It's a trauma response, and it's something she ends up doing for large parts of her career. And she's talking about all these big career highs. She's winning awards. She has a Las Vegas review show. She's got all of these things going, residency. She's got all of these things going, and she is just going through day by day to make sure it happens. And in the meantime, there are people around her who try to reach out and support her, but very quickly find themselves fired from their jobs or quietly shuffled away. I think it's a really difficult read in many ways, but I also think it's really interesting just to see how many of these things would have been hiding essentially in plain sight for so many years, that she would have been doing all of, living this sort of tricky life while, publicly would have to smile and, do fan meet and greets, and would be worked to the bone while people around her profited off of her. It's a really horrifying thing to read. But like I said earlier, I think the really incredible thing is that Britney, throughout the book, is just looking for peace. She wants to say her word and then move on and start a new chapter in her life. And I think that's a really quite beautiful thing about what this book is able to achieve. Anyway, I've been Bob the Bookerer, obviously a slightly different book to my usual fare, but I think a really interesting book in terms of publishing as well, that we've got this wildly successful book already. It's already sold ridiculous copies, but in all of that, this avoids a sort of sensationalist tell-all in many ways, and is just Britney trying to set her record straight, and essentially also help us as an audience rehabilitate even the image of a woman whose life has just been completely stripped away from her in many ways. Anyway, I've been Bob the Bookerer. Take care and see you all soon. Bye bye.